Hey there, Richard Tubb here for, believe it or not, episode 150 of Tubb Talk, the podcast for IT consultants. Yes, we've shared 150 of these long-form podcast interviews with the smartest, most successful people in the IT managed service industry. And if you were here with us for episode 50 and episode 100, you'll know that one of the treats I give to myself as the host for these milestone episodes is I interview one of my heroes who I've not only always wanted to speak with, but who I think will provide great value for you, our loyal listeners. Well, episode 50 was David Allen of Getting Things Done, GTD fame. Episode 100 was Maggie Philbin of Tomorrow's World fame. Now, for episode 150, I'm speaking to somebody who, I'll be honest, you may not have heard of before, but who is something of a legend within the managed services space. He's somebody I consider a great friend, who I have a lot of shared history with, as you'll hear about shortly, and who I consider one of the smartest people in our entire industry. Craig Sharp is the founder of UK-based MSP Abussi, one of the longest-running managed service providers in the country. Now, Craig founded Abussi in 1995 as a database supplier, and Abussi has transitioned over the past 26 years from software into break-fix hardware and then into managed services, which they've been rocking now for more than 15 years. Craig is something of a go-giver. He's somebody who's incredibly knowledgeable on customer success and managed services. And he's somebody I've always wanted to have as a guest on the show. I've bent his arm into doing this episode. I know you'll enjoy our conversation. Craig, welcome to Tubb Talk 150.
Well, I mean, after that introduction, Richard, what can I say? They say your ears burn when you're being talked about, but when it's being done in front of you, I mean, it's very humbling. Thank you so much for that really positive introduction.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And we'll get into, as I said, some of our shared history and things. I guess we should give some context for listeners off the bat, though. So a lot of our audience will know I used to run a managed service provider business based in Birmingham in the UK. I sold that business 13 years ago, it was now. But what they may not know is that your business, your MSP business, Abussi, was actually one of our competitors back in the day. Friendly competitors, I should say, as we'll explain a bit more there. Can you remember where we first met?
You know what? I honestly can't, but I suspect it was possibly an Amit Pro meeting at the Arden Hotel on the Coventry Road near the NEC. A very specific memory, but those of us in the space that were there at the time will remember the bizarre sunken coffee area that was in front of the bar, almost like a swimming pool that had been filled in with chairs and tables. It was a very weird situation. But yeah, I think it was probably at a meeting like that.
Yeah, Amit Pro, the Association of Midlands IT Professionals. It was a peer group in the West Midlands where Craig and our old stomping grounds, and in fact Craig's still down there, but we used to get together once a month, didn't we? You, me, a load of other MSPs, IT providers, and just talk about what it was like to run an MSP business. And that peer community, that's how a lot of us first connected, isn't it?
I mean, I have a horrible feeling that it was so long ago, because of course I am very, very old, that it may have even offered the opportunity to swap BASF 90 cassettes with Commodore 64 games on it. Who knows? I don't know.
I don't think it was that old.
It was quite a long time ago. I tell you what my previous comment I wish to be disassociated with, because it wasn't that long ago. But I tell you what, it's likely to be pre-broadband days.
Yeah, it could well be, couldn't it?
I have a vague recollection of my first broadband service going into a customer in around 2002, maybe 2004, something like that. And it was a 512k BT line that cost an absolute fortune, and everyone thought was an amazing piece of technology. And of course, like all technology, we look back on it and think, how did we ever live with that?
Well, dear listener, we are not here for old folks hour where we reminisce
about IT hour.
However, there might be some of that going on, and I make no bones about it, because Craig has got an incredible history within this industry, so much knowledge to share. But I guess, Craig, for the benefit of listeners, tell us about the 26-year Abussi story, and you've got to share with us as well where the Abussi name came from.
Well, we'll start with that. So My wife has a very unusual name, which I shall not repeat because she works in a very sensitive industry and makes very strong efforts to not be on social media and things of that nature. But Abussi was her middle name. So that's where it comes from. It has often been confused with Chris Abussi, but there's a K in Abussi and there isn't a K in Abussi. But weirdly, and I think you know this as well, I have met Chris Abussi. And as I walked across the conference hall towards him to say hello, he saw my big name badge that I'd got on a lanyard. He saw the word Abussi and he went, you're that Abussi guy. He said, I know you from Twitter, because I'd been trying to sort of connect with him on Twitter or whatever. Anyway, really friendly bloke, really nice bloke. We had a little photograph, which I still have. And so that's where the name comes from.
We'll have to include, sorry to interrupt, Craig, I guess for the benefit, because UK listeners are going to immediately know who Chris Abussi is, the famous athlete and television personality. For the benefit of people elsewhere in the world, our global audience, I don't know how we would even begin to describe Chris Abussi. We'll include a link in the show notes to his Wikipedia.
Wasn't he a 4x400 or a 4x100 baton relay runner, I think?
Yeah. But you were saying about the 26-year history of Abussi.
Yeah, so the name came from that, and so the history, if you want the sort of the factual history, was I wanted to work in IT from a teenage period of time. I was that generation that got a ZX Spectrum for Christmas in 1982, 1983. I sort of tinkered about with computers during the 80s and really wanted to go into it. When I said to my parents I wanted to do a BTEC in computing in 1988, they said, well, look, son, we're not sure about this computer lark. We think it's a bit of a fad and it's probably not going to last. Why don't you do a proper job and get proper qualifications, not this BTEC that we've never heard of before? It's not an A-level, is it? So that I was sort of pressured into doing something that was a bit more conformist. So the IT thing became more of a hobby, and I then ended up doing a geography degree and then left and wanted to be a geography teacher, but that was more because what do you do when you've done a degree and the money runs out? You try and find another course where they'll pay you £1,000. For those younger listeners listening, they used to pay you to go to university, not you pay them to go to university. So I did a teaching qualification, which I only part finished. And then when I left, I was given an opportunity to go and work as an IT project manager with somebody that I'd met in a work context. So I worked for the NHS in Plymouth as a project manager, managing the implementation of a very early form of electronic patient records, which actually still hasn't come to fruition. And this was in the early 90s. So we're now nearly 30 years later. And I then left the NHS, came up to Birmingham and worked as a systems analyst for the MEB, which again, outside of the Midlands, you won't know who it is, but MEB was the sort of Eon and power gen of its day. An electricity supplier, and they were transitioning from an old mainframe system into a newfangled computer system, and they wanted people to manage that sort of transition. So I did that for a bit, and that's how I got my database experience. And then I started to write databases for small commercial businesses. And that's sort of where the snowball begins, because once you go out into the commercial space to write product for people, you then end up with a product that has to sit on their network. And after a while, you realize that network's not very good and it's not going to work with the product that you've created. So you sort of get involved in a bit of an uplift of that. And then that leads you into conversations about servers and infrastructure. And so you roll into that space. And that's sort of how that started, and nearly 30 years later, we are where we are in a managed IT space.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and parallels with other people that I consider mentors and friends in the industry. Our mutual great friend Gareth Brown of SciTech, a Salisbury-based MSP, talks, not a dissimilar story. I've got a similar background in the NHS, and funnily enough, Npower and other electricity providers and stuff like that as well. So really interesting. But how many people? Tell us about where we are with Abussi at the moment. How many people within the Abussi business? What type of clients do you serve? Where are the staff based? That sort of thing.
So we have 8 people in Abussi, and there's been a rapid increase of that number over the last few years. For a long time, it was a small business consisting of somewhere between 3 or 4. And in the last 5 to 8 years, we've gone from 3 or 4 to 8. That was partly due to the acquisition of a pretty sizable company about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was very evident very early on that the resources to manage that company needed to be significantly bigger. So that was the catalyst for that. In terms of our spread, then we are spread all over the UK and Europe and South Africa. So we have a guy that works for us who's based in Johannesburg. We have a woman who works for us who's based in Budapest, and the rest of us are based in the UK. But again, not necessarily all that close, sort of Midlands, South Wales, and now West Wales as well. So we're geographically spread. But again, that's a tremendous change from really just 5-6 years ago. We were very early in realizing that we didn't necessarily need a physical premises in order to operate. We did have a physical premises back in the early 2000s, so 2006, 7, 8. And then during the financial crash, there were problems that some of us will be aware of that are old enough to remember those times. They were pretty dark times, I'll be honest. Financial situation, business was in a little bit of problem. We navigated through that, but we navigated through it by exiting the premises that we were in, thinking, well, this will be a short-term thing, and maybe in a year's time we'll be back in a premises. And to be honest, from about 2010, we've never been back in a formal premises. We just haven't needed to. But yet again, I think that demonstrates what it is that we're here to do, which is prove to clients that the American phrase we both know, eat your own dog food. If you can't demonstrate to yourself that these technologies work, how are you going to convince other clients to buy these services from you? So we were very early adopters of voice over IP technology, so that allowed us to manage telephone calls, which was always the early problem in trying to work remotely, was telephony, less so IT. And then particularly as we got through towards the COVID times, all those technologies just kind of came together. And now it would be seen as more unusual to have a physical premises than not, I think.
Yeah, and I think it will become apparent to our listeners as we go on, or perhaps already, why I was so keen to get Craig on this episode, not only because he's a great influence on me, a great friend of mine for many, many years, but also you've already heard that, Craig, you've been ahead of the curve for a number of years and going back a long time. The other thing I want to pull out from that is you talked about how the business has grown, but it's still not what people would call a huge MSP. And I think that's by design, isn't it, Craig? Because I've got to share with you, I'm reading a book at the moment. The name escapes me. I think it's called Company of One by Paul Jarvis. And I'm not suggesting that's the case, but there is a stampede, isn't there, with most of us in the IT industry to say bigger is better. You and I both know that's not the case. I'd much rather have a business that was making £100,000 profit on £250,000 turnover with just a handful of staff than, say, 20 members of staff, 1.5 million and £90,000 of profit. The profit's the sanity, the turnover is the vanity bit, but it becomes very difficult to manage teams as you get bigger. And you've sort of emphasized over your time that I've seen with Abussi that bigger isn't better. And actually, sometimes being small, being tight, being efficient is a much better way to do things.
Yeah, I think there are 3 elements that we can tease out of that. The first is a sort of a hypocritical story, which is true. I will give him a shout out. He may no longer be with us. This is a long time ago, but around the turn of the millennium, I used to have a really good relationship with an early web design company, and it was run by a guy called Bob Fox. Absolutely nicest man you'll ever meet. He'd been around the block, excuse me. He'd run a business for many years. He'd been in lots of different businesses, and we got on really, really well. And back in the day, you'll remember business network meetings, they used to talk about spheres of influence, and the telephone guy and the IT guy and the web guy would or girl or woman, I should say, would always be in that sphere because the technology industries would sort of lend themselves to be able to offer help and opportunity. So we work really well together. And Bob Fox always said to me this. He said, Craig, if I can tell you one thing that I've learned to be true, is if your business gets above 10 people, you stop being a business owner and you start being a social worker. He says, there's nothing wrong with being a social worker. It's a great profession, he said, but I don't want to be a social worker. I don't want to deal with people's problems, illness, issues of the day, work problems, colleague infighting, he said. And all I've learned over the years, having run big and small businesses, is 10 is about the level you sort of want to get to before it starts to become a social work job. And although 10 is not a hard and fast rule, you know, it could be 8, it could be 12, whatever. The point is that's always stuck in my mind that somebody who had been in business for so long said that. And I do truly believe it to be correct. People listening to this who run businesses with 20, 30, 40 people, you can take your own view. If there's a comment section below, write your comment. It could be that I'm wrong. It could be that I'm absolutely on the money. So the first thing was I never really wanted the business to be that big. The second thing is, going back to the eat your own dog food, we are there to demonstrate that technology is an effect multiplier. You should be able to do more with less. One of the early things we adopted as a sales tool when we became an MSP and we stopped being a value-added reseller, a VAR, was we used to demonstrate through numbers. We would say, right, if you call on us this number of times, or you call on us that number of times, or you buy this number of hours, or whatever it is, over the course of a year, we could have saved you X. And one of the things we used to use as a demonstrator of that was, well, that's a member of staff. We could save you the cost of a member of staff. We can help you do more. Not you have to employ extra people, but we can help you do more with the technology that you're buying. So that's the second thing, is if you can't demonstrate that a relatively modest business has a wide and extensive reach through the use of technology, then I think that's a bit of a shame. And the third element about it is really just trying to make sure that you manage your business to a point where relationships, which you know I think are really important, can be maintained. The bigger you get, the weaker the bond of that relationship becomes. You become a statistic, or the client just becomes a statistic on your balance sheet. And you look at the balance sheet and go, oh, that's great. But you forget that that's Tom, or that's Brenda, or that's Keith, or that's June. And you forget that those people are the people you built the original relationship with, and it becomes stale. And I'm all about relationships, sometimes to my detriment. Sometimes I can take things a little too personally, and I'm conscious of that, and I try not to. It is business after all. But I think if you're aware that if a business gets too big, it's hard to manage. If you can't demonstrate to customers that you are adding a multiplying effect through technology, and if you lose the ability to have the relationships that got you their business in the first place, then I would just see that as a problem.
Wow. Incredible. I can see that being a soundbite, Craig, that we pull out of this episode. It's so good. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, actually. So Abussi has been one of the most recognizable names, certainly in your part of the world, in managed services for many, many years now. Looking from the outside looking in, I put a lot of that success down to how you personally handle client management and customer success. I understand the business you've got a really low turnover of clients. I believe you told me that before. Yeah. And I want to say specifically, I also learned the value of cakes and donuts for clients. So tell our listeners more about how you and Abussi handles those long-term client relationships, and tell people why I'm not just waffling on about waffles, cakes and donuts.
Nice segue. I'll give you for that. The first thing I would say is that none of this is possible without the business relationship that I have with my fellow director, Paul. Paul and I met probably nearly 20 years ago now, and that relationship works brilliantly. And I cannot say enough positive things about the way that Paul and I have managed that relationship. It's from the outside something that hopefully is seen as a true partnership. But in reality, what makes it work really well is that Paul and I have a similar outlook and a direction of travel, but neither of us are keen to get too involved in the areas in which we have responsibility for. I tried early on to work with people and found that actually it was going to be both of us fighting over the sort of what might be seen as the nice bits of the business, and neither of us want to get involved in the dirtier bits of the business. But the truth is that Paul and I get on really well. We have an excellent professional relationship. We have an excellent working relationship. We both have clear lanes in which we can operate and both excel in each of those lanes. But relationships is one of them. Paul is excellent at managing and maintaining relationships. I enjoy building initial relationships with customers and clients to get them on board. The point that you make about gifts, sweeteners in both the literal and practical sense of the word, because it tends to be cakes and biscuits, they are things that I think are necessary to demonstrate when mistakes have been made. And I can give an example of what happened just before Christmas, 4 or 5 months ago. Abussi was managing the installation of a new Starlink service for a customer, which we used to augment an existing but pretty poor fibre to the cabinet service.
And so Starlink is Elon Musk's
yeah, that's right,
satellite-based broadband. Yeah.
May want to park it and come onto it later, but to be honest, we've had quite a lot of success with Starlink, and actually, I'll be honest, it's a very good service. So we implemented that service with a customer. There was some work that required us to install a new little comms cabinet to rationalize and simplify what they'd already got. New comms cabinet, new Starlink, pull the two things together, fine. On the day, for a whole variety of reasons, partly I think old equipment and whatever else, they were offline for maybe 4 hours when we'd said they were going to be offline for 1. So within 2 days, a basket of muffins had arrived and an apology for them being offline. It turned out that they didn't mind, genuinely. It wasn't massively impactful because it was near Christmas and a lot of people were not working from site. They kept saying, look, it's not a problem, it's fine. But I just think morally it's really important that if you've given a customer an outline of how long you think they're going to be offline and you fail to meet that you acknowledge that mistake. There's one earlier this week. We have a client where we're doing some telephony migration. You work with a telephony partner. Those listening to this may have had similar situations. Your timeline and the telephony partner's timeline often don't mix, and you can find yourself sort of left a bit hanging. There's a situation where there's a possibility that something might not be working for 48 hours in advance of a transition. You don't wait for that to happen. You reach out to the customer in advance and you say, I've spotted this. I think this might happen. I just need to give you advice in advance that it might, so that you're aware, rather than wait for it to happen and then get a call from them going, why has this happened? Why didn't you tell me? It's really difficult. And I don't want to get sort of too deep into merging into lots of different areas of life, but it's any sort of relationship, whether it be business or personal. Communication is really key. If you don't tell somebody something, then they don't know and they can't react or deal with the situation. If you tell them something, even if it's bad news, they may not want to hear it, but ultimately they'll be grateful that they know about it so that they can act upon it. And I just think that's how you should deal with customers. You should tell them bad news early, and you should tell them good news, whenever you can. And you should try to highlight the fact that if there is going to be a problem, what is it? Why has it happened? Are you taking responsibility for it? And what are the plans to try and mitigate it? So I just think that's how that should work. And where we fail in those areas, then we send the occasional, small gift. Many of the customers are absolutely bowled over by it. And the truth of the matter is, there's a company online, there's many companies online that will send cookies or muffins in the post. It's a £30 to £40 cost that you spend. I don't see it as a cost. I see it as an investment because you're investing in that relationship. And a £30 or £40 gift of 12 muffins to a company that will enjoy eating them on a Wednesday morning with a cup of tea at 11 o'clock is worth infinitely more than the investment you've made in that basket being sent to them. So that's how I look at it.
I love it. And another thing I picked up from you was the value of, if you're going along to client sites, turning up with sweet treats in hand, because I think it was you who said to me, no client in history has ever turned away somebody at the door who's carrying a big box of donuts. So you're never seen as a bad visitor.
I have a rule that if I mean, look, this actually used to be more prevalent because we used to have a lot of clients that were in the city centre of Birmingham. It used to be very common sort of 10, 15 years ago that I would pick a day and I would turn up early in the morning with a pre-arranged meeting with a customer. The first meeting of the day would always have croissants or pastries or something, which again, I think is just a nice opener. And then because there were other clients nearby, once you'd left that meeting, there was nothing wrong with sort of walking past a customer and popping in and going, oh, I was literally just passing by, not a contrived situation. You know, it wasn't that you've turned up hoping, but you were literally walking by, pop in to say hello, maybe have a little cup of tea with them, see how things are going. Not something you do every week, maybe something you do every couple of months, but that physical presence to the customer, I still feel is really, really important. And I still do it, as you know.
Yeah. And I would say if you get good at managed services or great at managed services, as Abussi clearly are, there comes an issue, and many listeners will appreciate this, where you get so good at doing it that the clients forget the pain that they experienced and end up calling you and saying, what is it we're paying you for? So actually, the seeing you, having the visibility of you, visiting site, being a presence there, you know, like a traditional IT person, they can tap on the shoulder and say, oh, while you're here, that's really powerful, actually, isn't it?
The while you're here is really important. We have an interesting client mix in that we have probably 2 or 3 clients who are significantly bigger than the other clients that we have. The other clients that we have are still sizable for an MSP, but actually by comparison, these other 2 or 3 are a scale higher. And for those clients, the really big clients, we have a scheduled selection of regular visits. The biggest has a weekly visit from Paul, my fellow director. The second largest has a monthly visit, and we make regular visits to those clients because they're so sizable that if you don't make a visit, exactly what you said will happen. And the other thing that is often forgotten about is no amount of recommending to users, just send us a support ticket or just call in and raise an issue. Anything you've got that's going wrong, just give us a call. They won't do it. There's a grade of problem that occurs that falls below a level of reporting. And so if you've got a little niggly problem that you've sort of got a workaround for and it kind of works for you every day, you won't raise a ticket for it. You won't seek help and support for it. You'll just let it rumble on. But when someone turns up and you go, oh, there's that guy or girl from Abussi, while you're here, can you just have a little look at this thing for me? And again, all the IT people listening to this will go, oh, I hate those because I'm ill prepared for them. But you can do it in 2 ways. You can either fix it yourself. And I have to be honest, at my point in life, I don't have the skills anymore to be able to do that. I'm very account management and not very technical anymore. If I get involved in technical problems, the technical team will ask me to cease and desist because I will not be doing it right. But what you can do is you can also re-emphasize that issue of how easy it is to raise a matter. So you can say, I'll help you raise that matter. Or I just raise it directly to the team whilst I'm on site, make sure that connection between the tech person and the user has been established. Then I can get about my other jobs, likely walking past somebody else who then also goes, oh, while you're here, can you? So I think just that presence is really important. And the larger the client, the more likely it is that presence will have added value that you can't identify just by looking at a spreadsheet or a time management list.
Yeah, I mean, when I ran my MSP business, and I believe I picked it up from you, was the idea of doing floor walks where we would send an engineer out to a client site, load it up with cookies or donuts or whatever, say, oh, I'm just here to do some labeling or whatever, something insignificant for the engineer. But then the engineer would literally walk around, make themselves known on the client site and say, can I help you with anything? And the amount of tickets that we uncovered that otherwise could have festered, that printer in the corner. I remember an engineer saying to me once, they had a printer that wasn't working. Oh, how long wasn't it working for? 9 months. But we didn't want to bother you by raising a ticket for it. And so being there really helped out. So, and the other thing as well about those floor walks that we learned was engineers are incredibly good salespeople because they don't sell. So our engineers used to come back from those floor walks with all sorts of new business there because end users would trust them not to sell to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think in reality, the sort of presence through stealth, if you want that as a soundbite, your presence at site through a stealthy method, which is we've come to label some stuff, we've come to recable something, we've come to just check on a few things or whatever. That can find you not just technical problems, but sales opportunities. It takes some thought sometimes to see a conversation turn into what is a sales opportunity. There will be some people who will talk about something and the less focused mind will go, yeah, he kind of told me a story about something to do with them moving into a new office, but it didn't seem relevant at the time, so we'll just park it. And then you go, well, hang on a minute. If they're moving into a new office, is that expansion? Is that going to require new people? Is there a cabling opportunity there? Are they going to need additional telephony? What are the timelines? Because the other problem you'll find is that if you don't do those floor walks or you don't get conversations with people where you find these things out, you find out about them on the day that they happen. Yes. And then you end up in a reactionary situation where you are being phoned up by somebody saying, we've moved 8 people out into that office out the back that was empty, and none of them can get any internet. Can you sort that out for me, please? And you go, well, that office is not cabled and there's no Wi-Fi in there and it's going to take a number of days or weeks to sort that out. Why didn't we know in advance? Again, you'll probably come onto this because you've talked to me before and it's one of my pet hates, but customers don't care about the planning. Customers care about, is it working or is it not? Is IT good? Is IT bad? And when IT bad, make IT good. That's a really simple black and white sort of approach. And the thing is, you also have to get into the psychology of the customer, which is if you're dealing with an accountant or a financial services company or a construction company, that's where their primary skill is. It's not in IT project management. So if they sort of think to themselves, well, we're going to open a new little office around the corner, or we're going to expand into an area of the building that's empty at the moment because we need more people to work in that area, they'll just work on everything except IT because they won't give it any thought. And here's the weird thing. You can get really annoyed about that, but you could also see it as our IT guys are so brilliant that whatever we throw at them, they always solve it. And so I'm expecting that when we tell them that we've moved into that office, they'll be able to get it sorted pretty quickly. And so in a weird sort of way, your lack of involvement in any IT-related project can sometimes be a backhanded compliment because if you're doing a really good job in IT, you're not thought of on a daily basis. You're only thought about when there's a problem. And you said earlier, if you do a really good job, they get to a point where they forget about you. And so you have to be brought back into that conversation. You kind of have to just have that reminder of, oh, okay, you're going to be moving some people over there. So while I'm here, let me just go and check and see what provision there is. And okay, I've had a bit of a look, but just so you're aware, I don't know what your timelines are for that. But if you did want to move some people into there, we'd probably need to do some cabling or maybe you need some more power in there, or maybe we need to get some Wi-Fi in there or whatever. And that's going to take a couple of weeks. Does that fit with your timeline? Oh, well, we were hoping for next week. Oh, right. Okay. Well, we better get onto that, pretty quickly. So straight away, you've turned an innocuous conversation about moving some desks into a cabling, Wi-Fi, maybe some site time project work. And, that's kind of what we're there to do. Support the customer to make their life easier and to get the multiplication effect that IT is having for them, and for them to not have a situation where everything comes to a stop because something's been missed. It's your job to try and spot that rather than wait for it to happen. The point of MSP, you're managing, you're not reacting. Mm-hmm. Try and reduce the amount of reaction and increase the amount of management. I think that's the key.
I couldn't agree more. I know you love tech as much as I do, but I've never seen you as a techie. So you and I talk about tech. We text each other about tech and things like that. So you're passionate about tech, but you're not a techie. You've already made that clear. I've seen that you place a great deal of emphasis on systems and processes to help your clients and to help the business tick over. Do you think that's unusual for a managed service provider business?
I think it is, and it's mostly unusual because just by the very nature of managed services businesses, many of them, probably more than half of them, are run by people who have a very technical background. If you've come out of a programming or a tech area, I mean, look, you and I remember the Gerber book, the E-Myth book. You talk about specialists who have, in the book itself, it talks about a baker who becomes a really good baker and suddenly runs a business because their baked products are really good and everybody wants to buy them. And before you know it, this baker has become a baker, a marketing person, a business manager, a financial advisor, because they need to sort out finance in their business. They're not doing what it is that they were originally there to do, which is bake. A lot of people who are technically minded find themselves almost accidentally running a business that has got a sizable turnover and maybe a number of staff. And that was never their background. And they operate in a manner which works for them. And that's absolutely fine. But if you're very technically orientated, your focus will be on the tech. It may not be on the relationship. It may not be on the business. It may not be on the strategy. And those are the areas in which you probably need some help or some assistance. I think my background as a project manager has been vital because you act as, another old reference here, the Babel fish of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You operate as the interpreter between the end user and the technician. And it's fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating, that even when I work with my tech team currently, you engage with them on a particular matter and their focus is almost immediately to the technical problem. But that's not working. The customer's complaining about that. Okay, well, I can think of 4 other things which are even more important while that's not working that we also need to deal with. And they won't be technical. They will be things like, how is that person going to continue to operate? Will that person have to relocate because there's a problem that means they can't work in that environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it is unusual for people who run MSP businesses to not think of the wider context and maybe focus myopically on the technical issue. But I think if you're going to offer a more holistic service, you kind of have to think of all of it.
And you've mentioned your background as a project manager. You've also mentioned early on that you came out of university as a teacher, geography that you were talking about as well. So I've observed that you've brought a lot of that passion for sharing knowledge into your MSP business, into the Abussi business there. How would you say that passion for sharing knowledge helps you with your clients?
I think it's helpful because what it does is I try to put myself on the same level as the customer. I put myself in their shoes. There's no self-aggrandizement here. There's no me wandering into a customer and going, right, I'm the guy with all the technical solutions. Listen to what I have to say. I am a genius in this matter. What I say is the rule, and you will follow, and everything will be great. What I do is I go into a business and I sort of put myself in their shoes, and I go, okay, so your challenge is this. You're having problems here. Is there something that could help solve that problem? But at every stage, it's done in a language that they understand. And I think that's really, really important because actually, there's a modern phrase, isn't there, about your real self, your true self, honest self, whatever it is. You've just got to be truthful and be honest with customers and say, look, you're not technically minded. I am technically minded, but this is about a relationship. We're going back to the word relationship again. I can't do this individually on my own because it's your business, and you can't do it individually on your own because you don't have the expertise. But the coming together of the two of us is what makes this work. And if you can't make that relationship, that connection work, then neither of you are going to get the outcomes that you want. And the way that you make that work is to blend your knowledge with their knowledge on a level that works for both of you. If you're at different levels and at different positions in that relationship, then again, it still won't work. So whenever we're talking to customers, we're not providing technical answers. We're providing business solutions. So we do a lot of work now in what would broadly be termed in our industry professional services. So the technical answer to that is you're using Microsoft workflow, Power BI, automations, forms. Again, what used to be back in the day a kind of a Microsoft Access database, really. You're using those tools to capture data, manage data, process data, create outcomes. And all of that is effectively helping that multiplier effect. But you don't talk about it in those terms. You don't talk about Power BI and you don't talk about forms and data capture and all the rest of it. What you do is you sit in a customer. Let's take one of our customers who's an estate agent, and you go, I see you manage a lot of keys coming in from other properties. How do you know who's got what key? Oh, well, what we do is we have a spreadsheet, but we have a bit of a problem with the spreadsheet because 17 people open it at different times and we end up with multiple copies and it all gets a bit messy. And okay. So if there was a solution that allowed you to have kind of a little app on your phone where you could check in a key and check out a key, and then there'd always be a real-time list that you could look to, would that be helpful? Oh, that would be great. Yeah. Well, that's a Power BI application. That's a workflow process. But you've not said that to the customer. What you've done is you've said, you've got a problem that we can see. If we could solve that problem, would that be helpful? End of conversation, really, because at that point, they're going, these guys can solve a really big problem for us. So whatever they put forward as a price, probably it's going to be worthwhile for us. So that's the way to do it, is get to the level of the customer and look at it from their perspective and from their point of view. And then I think you'll have a much better relationship with that customer in the longer term. And for fear of going on a bit too long on this one, it engenders trust. One of the things that we met last week at the NEC, and I think we spoke about this in the group that we were in. We don't sell stuff to people because we don't need to. That's a very bold statement to make, but it's true. The reason we don't need to sell anything to people is when they say, what do I need to solve this problem? And we go, you need solution X or Y. They go, well, if you've told us it's X or Y, we better buy X or Y then. That is the level of trust that you want to try and engender from your customers, because you don't want to have to be a salesperson every time, providing 3 different quotes or going through a beauty parade to sell a couple of laptops or some hardware or some professional services. You want to be the trusted advisor so that if they reach out to you and say, I've got this problem, how do I solve it? And you put forward the solution, they trust you enough to go, well, if that's what they've said, that's what we should do. We don't need to go to anybody else because we have the trust in that company to take their advice. And that is what all of what we've said up to now leads towards. All the relationship building, all of the truth about what's going on, all of the cookies to try and make sure that you deal with situations where they've gone bad, coughing for problems that are going to occur that you get ahead of, all of that path, that Wizard of Oz golden road leads to a point where you can have a conversation with a customer in shorthand and go, you need this. Okay, we'll buy that. Send me the purchase order. Thanks very much. The end. And that's kind of where you want to get to, but it's really hard and it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And that's why it's relatively rare.
Consistent effort. You've talked about systems and processes. You've talked about building relationships. You've talked about building trust and imparting knowledge, that type of thing. And I think it's clear to anybody listening that you are very open and honest about sharing your knowledge, sharing what works, what doesn't. You've just referred to the fact, a couple of weeks ago, you and I were in Birmingham, our hometown, for the Channel Live event at the Birmingham NEC, the National Exhibition Centre. And you were holding court at one point. There was a group of MSPs and industry people all surrounding you while we were talking about a specific topic. So you share quite openly your knowledge, not just with your clients, but with your peers, with other IT providers as well. I mentioned back in the day, we used to be competitors, but even then, we were very friendly, weren't we? When you speak to people outside the IT industry, do you find, friends, family, do they get baffled when you mention how you might share so openly with what they might consider competitive businesses?
I mean, look, dealing with the issue of holding court at the NEC, I partly think that's because at 6'6", I'm somewhat of a totem in the middle of the room that people are drawn towards. So whether they're drawn due to my pearls of wisdom, or whether they're drawn just because they go, look, something really tall that we can focus on.
I think partly that you underestimate your influence on other people, though. I saw people being drawn into that conversation.
I appreciate that. And I am very self-deprecating, and I will take the mickey out of myself in that regard. But you're very kind. And I think the issue about sharing with people, and this is the honest truth, which I will always tell you and your associated listeners, is I genuinely don't think that what I do is particularly special or particularly different or particularly unusual. And I don't think that I've got any particular special powers. And therefore, when I'm talking to people, I think the subtext and the subconscious element of it is this. It's me going, you know what? It's really not that difficult. If someone like me can do it, I'm sure you can. And here's a few little tips that will help you get that done. And if that's of any help to you at all, I'm happy to pass that on to you. That's sort of how I feel about it. I appreciate that there must be some sort of, there is a skill set, and I've worked hard at being able to build these skills over the years. A lot of it comes just from experience and having those knocks that you learn from. And then you go, oh, okay, right, we won't do that again. We'll do something else. But I genuinely want other people to be able to go, oh, okay, well, I can see that works for him, and he's given me some helpful tips and advice, and maybe if I try those things, then I can be helpful too. I do have a very socialist is not the right word, a very community orientated sort of sense. I'm very happy to help and be helpful to people if I can. If I can offer any sort of things like, oh, never believe it. Well, I did that once, and I that wasn't a very good idea. So if I were in your shoes, I might try this. Any sort of experience. I mean, that's how society works, is it not? We all learn from each other. We all benefit from each other's experience. We all work towards a greater good, and hopefully we all benefit as a result. And so that's my perspective, really. Anything I can do to help people get a little bit of extra knowledge that they might not get elsewhere, happy to do so. And if you're willing to listen to me, even better.
I find it fascinating that go-givers like yourself take it for granted that everybody would behave in that fashion. It's been my experience, though, that probably 90% of any given community, business community included, tends to be very passive. They listen, but they don't necessarily contribute. So I'm very grateful for people like yourself, Craig, who I've learned from. We've had so many guests on this show who have shared openly and honestly. In fact, I'm reminded, before I stepped away from the Tech Tribe business a couple of years ago, you and I used to host the monthly Tech Tribe, the tribal gatherings, the virtual meetups, as we call them. And we would answer questions from MSPs all over the world for what was, I think it was supposed to be an hour we got scheduled in for it, wasn't it? And we would end up going 2-3 hours, sometimes more than that, chatting away to people. Now, you've been a part of a lot of communities, CompTIA, we've mentioned Amit Pro, other global communities. What does the managed service community mean to you?
It's a group of people who are trying really hard to turn what is often their own personal passion into both I was going to use the word vocation. I'm going to park that and come back onto it in a minute. But they're using their personal passion as a vehicle for their own improvement, materially and physically, because they are using it to earn money, and they are hopefully bringing about improvement for themselves and for others. And it's also a pool in which we all swim, and hopefully, going back to what I said a moment ago, can gain value from. Going to those CompTIA and similar events are helpful, because for many people in our industry, we are, I think, naturally quite shy. We all know that there's not a huge gender diversity in our community. It's predominantly male orientated. Therefore, the interpersonal skills, again, very generic comments, which I appreciate may seem a bit harsh, but generically, men are perhaps less good than women at being able to build those interpersonal relationships, certainly on a one-to-one basis. And so having a community, an event, something that you can go to for maybe a day or an overnight, as the CompTIA events tend to be, where you can meet with people and perhaps be there for a bit longer and break down those slightly nervous barriers. You can start to share with people some information and learn. Overall, the word community is the most important. The community is there to help and support other people in that community. I parked the word vocation. I know that's often used to describe things that people do that are not commercially viable. That seems to often be the case. Oh, well, my vocation is, the church, or my vocation is caring. There's a lot of people who work in the care sector. They see it as a vocation. It's not hugely profitable, but they absolutely love doing it, and it's what they live for. I think there's a huge number of people in our MSP and IT community who do what they do because they absolutely love it. And the challenge is that actually I've been a huge advocate over the years of trying to use the bits of knowledge that I've got and the experience that I've got to say to people who are in that space and saying, well, I just love it, but I don't seem to be able to make very much money at it, is to sort of stand up and go, you've got really valuable knowledge here that people can benefit from, and that deserves to be recognized. A lot of the things that I try to instill in our team is that when people are asking for things, we don't just give it away. We provide it in a commercial capacity. It's a very poncy way of saying we have specialist knowledge that we deserve to be paid for. And again, that community, our IT and MSP community, are full of people who, through fear of embarrassment, through fear of low personal confidence, through fear of not wanting to have a difficult conversation with a customer because they feel on shaky ground, will just get on and do something and give away a huge amount of commercially valuable skills and services. And I just think that's wrong, to be honest. I think it's a situation where people, I don't like exploitation at any level, and I'm not saying that we are being exploited, but I think one should also realize that the skill set that you bring to your clients has value. And there's nothing wrong with turning around and saying, well, if you'd like us to complete this project X, that's going to cost this amount of money, Y. And if the customer comes back and says, well, we think that's quite a lot, have a conversation about why you feel that that's justified. You might charge a day rate for project work, and you go, well, it's going to take 15 days and we charge this amount per day. Oh, well, I don't know. I think it's going to take 5 days. Again, you don't say it to their face, but my response would be, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you'd got all the IT skill. I wonder why you're asking me to do it then. So, those kind of things. But going back to your serious point, it's about the community helping the community to be better at what it does and to realize, hopefully, more of a commercial value from the valuable skills that community has and are often overlooked. The IT guy is the butt of a joke. It's a punchline, and it shouldn't be, because they always did have a huge amount of skill, and in the modern world have even more. And I just think it's important that we all recognize that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. At the start of our conversation, I mentioned many listeners might not have heard the name Craig Sharp. They've probably heard the name Abussi, but despite your longevity in industry, despite the wealth of knowledge that you've got, and while you're active on some social media, I've observed as a friend, over many years that you tend to focus on cultivating those in-person relationships instead. Was that a conscious decision on your part? I mean, what's your relationship with social media?
I am of a generation. I've skirted around the issue just so that we can be clear with everybody. I am 52 years of age. Yes, I look much older, but fine.
You do not. Stop
I
it.
am 52 years of age. I am of a generation where social media came upon us. We were not brought up with it. It is not second nature. I remember opening my Twitter account when it was new, and I think it might have even been you who went, there's this thing called Twitter, Craig. It's really good, and it's 140 characters, and you can type messages. And my immediate response was, why?
And some people might be asking that about X, Twitter, right exactly,
now. Yeah. My relationship with social media is thus. I do not genuinely understand why anybody would be interested in what I do. That's the truth of the matter is. Social media is a platform which has become a platform on which people are there to be seen, where one's activities are promoted, but one's problems and issues are not. And it presents a false view of the world. I very rarely go onto LinkedIn, and I scroll down my feed of LinkedIn, and it's, hello, I've won an award. Hello, I've attended a business event. We've been put forward for this award. We're doing really well here, blah, blah, blah. I'm not decrying or diminishing the value of those accolades. They're obviously to that person, really, really important. But I can't help but naturally come back to my first point, which is, why would anyone care about whether we've won an award? I just kind of don't get it. So for me, I don't self-promote on social media. We have a standard selection of scheduled posts which are about generic IT related things, which go out on X and which go out on Facebook and which go out on LinkedIn. But they very rarely talk about us as a business. They very rarely talk about our activities. And that's kind of why I guess there's a mystique is the wrong word. There's a sort of an awareness of Abussi, but not a great awareness, because we don't talk about the customers. We don't talk about activities. We don't put project work on, because for me, I don't see it as important. I like to get on with what we do it the best that we can, and just know in our own heart of hearts that we've done a great job. I don't need that sort of external verification. And again, going back to the point about social media as a demonstration of personal successes, it doesn't show you all of the stuff that goes on underneath, the old iceberg argument of, well, you see 10% at the top, but you don't know the 90% underneath. Social media is an absolutely classic example of that. There's so much going on in the background that you just don't know about, much of it not great. And I don't think social media helps. It makes you even more dependent on external validation. You kind of need to feel it in your heart. You don't need other people to press a like button for you to feel that you've done good work. So that's my experience. And because you're one of the few people who I allow to follow me on Facebook. Again, boomer alert, man uses Facebook. I know that that's not what the young kids are doing nowadays, but you'll know that most of my Facebook posts are lovely photographs of the countryside, hopefully, occasional visits to places with my wife, who again is never seen in images, you know yourself. And my other hobby is railways, and I do signalling on the Severn Valley Railway, and it's lots of pictures of signal boxes and trains, frankly. So that's it. And I very rarely feature in any of them, and you can attest to that.
Yeah. At social media, I'm waxing and waning on it, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I know the views of somebody like a Cal Newport, the author of Deep Work. And he said, look, he gives numerous examples of businesses like Abussi who are thriving with little or no social media presence. And he said, actually, if you do the deep work, if you put the work into doing what you do and becoming a master of your craft, people will find you, people will be drawn to you, and to just go with that. And then on the other hand, I see so many benefits that social media brings, to forming communities and strengthening sort of loose connections and things of that nature. But I'm reminded, I think it was my friend Philip Morgan who introduced me to a quote from Pastor Stephen Furtick, who said, social media is people's highlight reels. It doesn't show their backstage. And what people do, they compare their backstage to other people's highlight reels that they see. So I think it does, get to a stage where people are saying, looking at, all the awards that other people have won and all the wonderful things that are going on, and saying, oh, my life's not like that because I've got this, that, and the other, which is not so good. And I wouldn't transmit out there. So I go backwards and forwards on social media, but it's interesting to hear your opinion on it. And I want to move the conversation forwards a little bit here. Since the pandemic, the world has really changed in how it views IT. But I can recall you were well ahead of the curve with Abussi before most of the world moved to what we now call the cloud. And I think, listeners are probably getting the idea that one of the reasons that I invited you on the podcast was so desperate, so keen to get you on the podcast, Craig, is you are a trendsetter, whether you believe it or not. You do look into the future. You do see what's coming before other people do. So tell us what, for the benefit of MSPs listening, what type of solutions do you currently offer to clients, and what type of solutions are you thinking about offering in the future?
So all of our services are built around the Microsoft Cloud. We don't really have we have no servers that offer any of those traditional solutions. So there's no email servers, there's no data servers, there's nothing. Data for us is stored exclusively in the cloud, exclusively in SharePoint and OneDrive. We have, with the very large clients I mentioned earlier, we have 3 or 4 legacy servers which are providing a legacy accounts product and things like that. The kind of stuff that MSPs listening to this will be very, very familiar with. But every customer that we've ever taken on board, the plan has been to cloudify them, for want of a better word, if they're not already, and to make sure that the reliance upon local hardware is as minimal as possible. Now, again, that's a weird perspective for some MSPs because they will make a huge amount of money from provision of hardware and what I call stuff. A lot of MSPs will put forward a proposal and they will go, dear Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we can provide you with all these services because we're going to sell you all of this stuff. And I don't like stuff because stuff goes wrong and stuff becomes problematic and it gets out of date. And then what have you got to do? Sell them more stuff. And if you build your business around selling stuff, it kind of locks you into a type of approach, I think. So if you sell cloud, you can sell service, you can sell professional service, you can sell maintenance of those services. Just between you and me, people think it's really complicated to manage cloud stuff. And if the customer continues to think that, brilliant, because that's good for us all. Truth of the matter is, it isn't easier to manage it in the cloud, but it isn't any more difficult than managing local hardware, which itself will become old and tired and problematic. So overall, cloud is good. I think if you then get to a position where you are trying to sort of offer cloud services to people, that's because there's an element of flexibility and fleet of foot that you want to bring into a customer. You mentioned COVID, and I had a conversation with someone only the other day about the fact that I don't believe COVID changed anything in terms of our landscape as MSP and IT providers. All it did was accelerate what was already going to happen.
Right.
Everybody was always going to be working remotely, working on the move, working in multiple geographical locations, working flexibly, working out of the cloud. It's just that it happened probably 5 years earlier than it would have done had COVID not happened.
Yeah.
We've been talking to people about doing Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, implementing a more cloud-based phone system for years, because that's what we did when we going back to earlier, we decanted ourselves out of the premises that we had in 2010, thinking it was temporary, and we never went back. So from 2011, which for many people listening to this feels like ancient history, but for people like me, doesn't feel like that long ago, things like voice over IP, telephony over the internet were very, very early, but we were very early adopters of that. We were then able to help clients with that, and it offered them some flexibility, a few directors working from home, being connected to the office system, et cetera, et cetera. So as you extend into cloud services, extending into cloud telephony was the next thing that we did. We'd already early adopted it. We'd already got more than 50% of our clients using a particular type of product. We now have a similar number of our clients using Microsoft Teams phones. So for the technical listening, it's the PSTN interconnect service that Microsoft offer, but we use it through a partner. We don't do it direct through Microsoft because their service is a little limiting. And the third-party service that we buy has all sorts of really nice add-ons and hunt groups and timed groups and voicemails and all the rest of it. So where possible, we will try to extend the web of services that we provide to customers from infrastructure management, which should always be, I think, at the heart of what we offer. Can you connect onto a cabled network in a building? Is there internet there? Has it got a firewall? Is there Wi-Fi? Those are kind of the sort of meat and two veg of the services that we offer. On top of that, you've got hardware supply, laptops, PCs, monitors, docking stations, all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a big change in the last few years. The number of desktop PCs that we sell now, almost none. Every device we sell to a client is a laptop with a docking station and a large monitor that they use at the office. So once you've then expanded that into sort of infrastructure, hardware, we then provide telephony services using Microsoft Teams. There's one or two clients that retain the older voice over IP type service. That's for a whole variety of reasons, mostly cost. They're less sensitive to issues around reliability, where that can be a problem, whereas the Teams services tends to be pretty bulletproof. And then over and above that, I mentioned again earlier, we talk about professional services. There's just a growing trend amongst our clients of us moving into a space where we say, right, okay, well, we manage all of your IT, we manage all of your telephony services. We can see how your business actually works on a day-by-day basis, because we often have a lot of reach into these businesses that even the business owners or managers don't have. And we can say, well, we can see that in this area here, there's a lot of people managing a lot of data that's very messy and very difficult. And there's a lot of people transposing things off paper forms, which is leading to errors, whatever else. How about we have a conversation about being able to create a more, again, for want of an older phrase, database type service to manage that information for you. And so we're doing a huge amount of work in that, to the point that we are considering creating a new division of the business. I don't know, call it Abussi work or Abussi services or Abussi professional or something, where you can try and sort of hive off and say, right, this is a professional services side of our business. And it's also key to point out that as you expand into these areas, it presents the MSP and the IT provider with somewhat of a challenge, because you end up moving into an area where the customer has the wrong perspective on that service and on you.
Yeah.
So there's a risk if you start talking about professional services, database design, sexy things like that, they will sort of pause and rub their chin and look at you and go, but you're the guy that plugs stuff in and goes under my desk and puts a network cable in.
The IT guy, yeah.
How are you going to be the person that writes a workflow system that manages key parts of our business? And that disconnect can be quite hard to develop. So we've had good success by being able to do that with our existing customers, by them understanding what we do and us often doing little pieces of work for free, which opens their eyes to go, oh, these guys can do this. Oh, okay, fine, let's do that. But it's probably at a point where we need to create a separate business where we can approach people exclusively for that. And then weirdly, what's likely to happen is they'll go, oh, you've done all this database and professional stuff for us, but you do the physical infrastructure. Oh, that's quite interesting. So you might be able to transition in both directions, and that's sort of the plan for the future. And I think there's some great opportunity in that for all of us in this space.
Yeah, and once again, I would suggest that you're ahead of the curve with that thinking there, because I definitely see that's the way the industry is going. I think managed services will almost become something of a commodity, but then people who are doing professional services, who are doing business consultancy and things of that nature, they will go in with that conversation, but then inevitably the client will say, well, we still need the IT looking after. Oh, yeah, we do that. We've got an arm that does that. So it's really interesting to see where you're going with that. You mentioned one of your vendor clients there, Microsoft. Obviously, you've been a huge partner of Microsoft for many, many years. When I caught up with you and Paul, your technical director, Abussi's technical director in Birmingham, a couple of weeks ago, we spoke a lot about vendor relationships, of which I know you really value within your business, which is unusual for managed service providers as well. You take the vendor's business very, very seriously and treat them as a partner. Do you mind sharing with us which vendors that Abussi currently partner up with?
No, not at all. So Microsoft, of course, is our largest. We again, like all of us in our space, we don't buy directly from Microsoft. We buy with a UK reseller who used to be Cloud Market and now Guicon. We have recently moved from our RMM/PSA tool. I will be honest and tell a little story about that, actually, which is we, for many years, have been a partner of Atera. Brilliant product, really developed. I mean, again, I met them 8-9 years ago at a WebRoot event in Dublin, and we were at a point where the business was running on a sort of old-fashioned ticket system, and it really wasn't very good, and Atera offered a huge amount of promise. We moved over to Atera. They've developed the product hugely. I think it's a really, really good platform, and it works really, really well. We moved, not because of my choice wholeheartedly, but because the technical team had effectively presented to me situations where it wasn't doing what they wanted it to do. And there was an opportunity to move into a different product, which, again, I'll tell you what it is. It's Zoho, Zoho One, which is a very high-level ticketing system, but also lots of other benefits. And it has a unattended assist system, a bit like Log Me In and Splashtop and those kind of products. So we moved over from Atera into the Zoho One, and they're a really good partner for us. I mentioned WebRoot a moment ago. We used to be a huge user of WebRoot, and I take a view that once we commit to a thing, so a security thing or a PSA thing, that's what we do for everything. I don't have different things for different customers, and right. We don't have different things for different solutions. Hopefully, we all know the benefit of that, which is if you've only got one thing in a particular space, all of the tech people who are managing those have that level of ability to manage it across all clients. So we used to have WebRoot as a product. We're now transitioning into using Acronis. And again, what we've done there is there was a real evidence of WebRoot being a great product, but having bits missing that we needed to fill. We, like most MSPs listening to this, have just been bowled over by how many spam, malware, breach issues, ransomware. The internet security space has just gone mental. And many of the products that we're all very familiar with, WebRoot, we also had a use of Bitdefender and similar products like that. They're all good, but they all have areas which are not that brilliant anymore. And so we took a view last year that we were going to move wholesale over to Acronis. And the reason for that is that Acronis offer a package of services. So it starts with their email inbound filtering service, which I have to be honest is revolutionary and unbelievably good.
Wow.
You then have endpoint security, which feeds into the first module, but which itself is really, really good. There's then also a backup module, which backs up mailboxes and the user's data in OneDrive and SharePoint. And so you can see that there's this joined up thing. We could all find 2 or 3 things to provide 2 or 3 solutions for 2 or 3 problems. But if you go to somebody like Acronis, hopefully after this, their check is in the post. You've got a product which is linked together, can be managed through a single pane of glass, and which genuinely, technically, is brilliant. We also use a product called Untangle, which has recently renamed itself to Arista. I met Untangle at an event in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2008, April 2008. I spoke at an event at the Peachtree Plaza Hotel. And I only remember that because my sister-in-law lives in Atlanta. And it was a great opportunity to go and see my sister-in-law while talking at an event. And I met Untangle. And those of you that are old enough to remember it, it's a kind of Linux-based product you could load onto any old computer and turn it into a firewall. We use it as a firewall product. But we stuck with it for a bit and we were a Draytech partner for a long time. But Untangle kind of came good over the last 5-6 years. They started to produce appliances, and every single one of our clients now has an Untangle appliance. We don't have any customer that we look after that doesn't have an Untangle. That means we are the largest UK supplier of Untangle services, so I'm told. Which we buy those products through, again, another local reseller, because Untangle will sell you individually. But here's another little insight into the way that my mind works. If you buy all the individual licenses from Untangle, you'll get, I think at the last count, we had 43 devices out in the field. You'll get 43 invoices every month because it builds
painful.
That's just a paperwork nightmare. So we buy all of our licenses through a local reseller, which means we get a monthly singular license for all 43 licenses. Anyway, so that's why we do that. And I really like Untangle. I think it's a really great product, and it's different to Sonic Wall and WatchGuard and all of the others and Meraki, but it's a really well priced product that's pretty simple to use. And I'll tell you another little weird thing, and this might just be me, I don't know. Because it's not well known and because it's run on a completely different platform from anything else, it does seem pretty good at managing a lot of these threats, because it's not something that the broader hacking community is aware of and hasn't tried to sort of penetrate through the situation.
I can see that. It's got less of a security vector, I guess they would call it, because it's less, it flies under the radar. Yeah, that's
right. Less of a footprint, really. And so I find it works really well. We manage it from a single pane of glass. We can see all of our devices in one go. You can remotely connect to them. They take a standard build that you can throw out. If you send one to a customer in the post and they give you the serial number and they've just connected it onto a DHCP connection, you can talk to the device and pre-configure it and so on and so forth. We would never do that because we would go to site because of personal relationships. We wouldn't ask clients to just plug stuff in because then they would definitely go, hang on a minute, what are we paying you for if you're not coming to plug this really important thing in? So we those are really the core services. Microsoft, Soho, Untangle / Arista, and Acronis. Those are. Oh, and the other one we use is Zyxel. So we use Zyxel for network switches and Wi-Fi. And I have to say, I really like Zyxel as well. So they've got a single pane of glass that allows you to put devices into place. You scan a QR code when a device arrives from your supplier. You say which customer's that to go to, what do you want to call it? You plug it into a network cable, and 20 minutes later it appears. It's pre-configured. It's downloaded all of its SSID password information and just works. And we can manage it and change it and update it. And they self-update every time there's a firmware update. So anything to try and reduce management, really. But those are the core partners that we use.
Thank you for sharing. Very cool. We'll include links to all of those vendors and those tools and those solutions in the show notes for this show, which you can find at tubblog.co.uk. I want to pick up on something that you said, and that is about, obviously, you do work where you assess your vendor relationships, what's working, what's not. One of the biggest lessons I learned from you back in the day was that not every MSP client is a good fit for your managed service provider business. In fact, you and I, we were talking earlier about it. We, holding court at Channel Live in Birmingham recently, where you were sort of talking about the value in firing clients who are no longer a good fit for you. What's your view on the right fit clients for Abussi, and how do you handle prospects and who are not a good fit, and perhaps even clients who over time don't become a good fit?
I have two examples I can give you, which are contemporary in the last 3 months. The first one was an existing customer that we'd had for a number of years, I think seven years. And I had a review. I always have a review of customers around the late part of each year. The way that our business works is all of our Microsoft licenses renew in March. We have a fee review in January and February to make sure that the fees are going to be correct for the new arrangements. And then because, as all the MSPs will know, the NCE licensing arrangements with Microsoft means that you're now annually committed to these licenses unless you want to pay a premium to have monthly, which we don't want to do. We make sure that the clients are going to be happy with the fee and happy with the service we provide before we renew for a further year, because we don't want to be halfway through the year and then them go, actually, we're going to be leaving, and then we get lumbered with 6 months worth of fee or whatever. So we did a review of all of our customers, and there was one where our interaction with them was minimal. Their use of our services was minimal, as in they were in a serviced office, so there's no internet services, no networking services. They were effectively a group of individuals that sort of worked out of the same office. They weren't really a coherent business of people with a sort of a hierarchy or a structure. It was run by two business owners who were on their own path, and they didn't seem to have much of a connection between the two of them. We would offer advice, and it was often not necessarily taken on board. Overall, it was just one of those where you sort of look at it and go, I don't really know what value we're bringing to that customer or what value they're taking from having us with them. Right. And so I was just honest with that particular person and said, let me come in and talk to you. And they went, yeah, no problem. Come in early December. And I said, look, we're not going to renew when our contract comes to an end in March. And they were quite taken aback. Oh, why is that? And I sort of explained. I said, look, we just look across our client base and we see where we're offering the best value. And I'm not really sure that we're offering you the best value, and we're sort of going in a slightly different direction. You have to sort of soften the punches a little bit. The person was fine and they kind of understood. And after they'd taken that point on board, they were able to find, they work in a sort of IT adjacent field, and they knew people who could offer similar services to us. They found one. We worked with that MSP provider. We did the handover, finished a couple of weeks ago, all fine, no problems at all. So that's a way of us just sort of looking at what we do and saying, I don't think that's a good fit. You can also have a problem we've had in the past where you just kind of have that nightmare customer.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And going back to the comfort and the confidence that I spoke of earlier that some MSP owners are worried about. I mean, some MSP owners won't get rid of customers because they need the money. They can't afford to have that loss on their books. They don't want to upset people. They don't want to have that difficult conversation. But the truth of the matter is, if you've got a really difficult client, they're probably difficult for the two reasons at the same time. They're difficult because they take a massive draw of focus, and they're difficult because they probably don't pay very well either. And the truth is that you can't have those two things occurring at the same time. If a customer's a really good payer and drew a lot of focus, I'd kind of live with that and go, well, that's fine. They pay the bills on time. We're charging them the right amount of fee. They draw a lot of focus, but there's nothing we can do about it. Fine. If they're not paying their bills on time, you have to question, why are you investing so much time into somebody that's not even polite enough, in my opinion, to pay the bill? So there's lots of reasons why you might not have a client. The other end of the scale is where you have new prospects. And there's another interesting situation that occurred a couple of weeks ago. So a guy phoned me up. Oh, hello, I'm X from X. I've been recommended to you by one of your existing customers. Lovely. The best prospect you could ever hope for. Always good to be given recommendations, because the person that gives that recommendation has had to give something of themselves to get that other person to call you up or to make the recommendation. So a slight tangential conversation here is, if you're ever offered an opportunity from an existing customer, no matter how much you might initially think, I'm not sure this is going to be the right thing, you have to go and service that prospect. You have to go and have a conversation with them. You have to give them the right information. And then you have to be honest about reasons why you may not want to take them on board. And that is out of respect for the person who gave you that introduction. Never just dismiss it, because you're dismissing the prospect and you're disrespecting the person that gave you that opportunity. So this guy phoned up. I've been given your details by X. Lovely, no problem at all. I've got this problem. It was something to do with cloud services, Microsoft tenant issues. It all seemed a bit vague. Anyway, as I'm talking to him, the name that he gave me as his company was running through my mind going, I'm sure I've spoken to you before. I said, look, I'm driving at the moment. Let me go and get into a place where I can talk to you properly, and I'll phone you back later. So I did the research. I'd spoken to this person a year ago, sent him quite a lot of detail about the services that we offer, and he had declined. Yes, no, I don't know, not really for me. And so he was in a difficult situation. I told him how much it was going to cost, and he then got cold feet and gone, I don't know, there's only 6 of us. I'm not sure that's really worth it. And interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, turned out to be exactly the same situation. He got a problem. He'd been given our details as someone who could solve his problem. My argument was, we'll solve your problem as part of an onboarding process of you becoming a full-time customer. Right. What we don't do is we don't just fix your problem for a small fee and then you go away again and we don't ever speak to you again. We'll help you. Going back to the value of service that we bring, we can solve this problem for you as part of a onboarding process. So sent him the details. It will cost you this per month, this per user. Told him the time scale of onboarding. I said, look, it's a bit difficult. We don't normally do it this quickly, but I think we could probably get you onboarded, as there's a relatively modest number of you, 7 to 10 days. If we can start by having a site visit to make an assessment of what you've got, fine. Radio silence, absolutely nothing. And so that's just down to the confidence of knowing that that person is looking for a reactionary solution to a problem. And here's my psychology 101 answer as well, which is, I don't think they value IT services. Because if they did, they'd see the value of them having some significant problems within 2 problems within a year, because I'd spoken to him a year before, and realizing that we are the kind of people that could help solve those problems. And so ultimately, you've got to see an introduction to a prospect as an equal partnership. Many of these themes we're coming back to time and time again. When I go and visit a prospect, I don't turn up sort of tugging my forelock going, hello, sir, thanks very much for the opportunity. We'll do whatever you want in order to solve it because I really need the money. And I turn up going, tell me about you, tell me about where you are in terms of the process of IT. Are you represented at the moment? What's the reason, if you are, why you're looking to move? Where are your challenges? Let me tell you about us. Here's how we work. Here's the way that we operate. Here's the parameters in which we operate. Is this going to gel together? Are we going to work? And then we go away, we present the situation. And if it's going to work, then great. And if, I have been in situations where I've presented something and then gone, but I don't think this is going to be for us. I really thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, but I don't think this is going to be something we can pursue. I wish you all the best in your search in the future. And I just think you have to be honest with people, because you don't want to find yourself getting into another relationship that's going to cost you money, cost you time, potentially cost you reputation if things go wrong. And you've got to assess working with them as much as they're going to assess working with you. And I just think that's how it should be.
Yeah, a partnership. You don't want to get into a relationship with someone who doesn't value IT, perhaps wants to do things on the cheap, sees IT as a necessary evil. And I can tell you, Craig, you and I have talked about this as friends before, but every single time, and I hope I'm getting to the stage now where I'm learning this lesson, but every time I've done work with somebody purely for the money, the financial aspect, it's never ended well. It's never been fun and it's never ended well. You've got to go into managed services as a partnership, haven't you? But otherwise, you end up banging your head against a brick wall. You can't, as Carl Polichuk, my great friend and mentor, would say, you can't care about a client's network more than they do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's really interesting. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 situations, but there will have been more where I have consciously had that sense of we are in a danger zone.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I have sat down and I've got 2 prospects to speak to at the moment. And the business could do with a little bit more income and a little bit more recurring revenue. But I'm not convinced both of these customers are worthy for us to build that relationship with. But maybe one of them is offering a lot of money potentially. And you have to be really strong to go, don't just take it because it's there.
Yeah.
I have taken on board customers that I knew at the time were going to be a problem. And for whatever reason, mostly, as you say, revenue, money, difficult times, you go, this won't be the one that's a problem. And I'm obviously over emphasizing the issues here. It'll be fine. And 6 months later, you go, why did I do that? It was everything that I knew it would be. And after a while, you just have to trust the little spider sense that you've got, however you describe it, the gut feeling. And the guys on the tech team will joke with me because I will come back and go, yeah, they're not for us. And they go, but how do you know? I go, I've just got a sense of it. And it's, call it experience, call it bitter experience, call it just a sense, but you can spot a bad fit customer. I can spot a bad fit customer at 100 paces. And you just are polite and you go through the motions and you're very pleasant. And, another trick that you taught me, which is actually sometimes you'll just be upfront and go, this is not going to be for me, but thanks very much. Sometimes what you can do is you can deal with the situation through price. So you can go, okay, this is not going to be a great fit, but if we are going to take it on board, we're going to need a 25% uplift of our service because we're going to be really busy with this one. So you inflate the prices, which will have one of 2 effects. You either don't get the job because they think the prices are too high, in which case you go, fine. Or you do get the job, but you get it at the higher rate, in which case you go, fine. It's going to be a bit of a problem, but we're earning a 25% extra margin on this one. So it comes out in the wash and will be great.
Yeah. So you get compensated for the PITA, as we might call it in the industry, of dealing with that client.
Well, there is a small little joke again amongst the tech team, which is when they're talking about new services, it often crosses my desk because it's the money side of things, which is where I sit in the business. And they talk about, we need to be clear on how much CAT to add. It's not VAT, but CAT, which is Craig's added tax.
Ah.
So that's what they tend to sort of have a think about, what's the CAT on this job? And so I tend to give a verdict on it and then they move on and off again.
But listening to it, intuition, super important. You've mentioned a problem that I see, or a mistake that I see commonly with managed service providers, which is not having the right fit client and choosing to work with clients purely for financial reasons rather than the partnership. But you've done a lot of peer collaboration with MSPs over the years, other tech companies. You've worked with a lot of MSPs to give advice. You know the MSP market. In your experience, Craig, what's the biggest mistake that you're seeing MSPs out in the market make today?
I think you've got inward and outward issues. So I think the inward issue is going back to what we said earlier about being too technically focused, selling stuff, or a lot of marketing material is very much based around things. I know that's really easy. And I also know that when you work with certain vendors, they will give you, sales decks and all sorts of things that you can sort of push out to your customers, which they believe are absolute gold dust because they don't want to have to focus too much on marketing. Most MSPs are not marketing experts. I'm no marketing expert. So I think the outward, the issue is about making sure that you sell these solutions. Don't sell. I mean, I've always used car analogies. It's Ferrari can sell cars, but do I want a Ferrari? Acronis and other vendors sell great security solutions. You still have to make sure that they're the right fit and that they're going to do the right job. So, if you're an antiques dealer and you need to transport large wardrobes about the shires of England, don't go and buy a Ferrari because it's not going to fit in the boot.
It's not.
You're going to buy a Range Rover or a Volvo Estate or whatever. You've got to find the right fit. So taking that to the next level and going back to what I said earlier about focusing too much on the technical, if you just present a really technical solution about antivirus, endpoint protection, firewall, Wi-Fi to a customer, I genuinely think they don't care, and I genuinely think they won't understand. You've got to put that in the context of a solution. What is the problem? Focus on the problem, then say, I have a solution for this, because I genuinely think the customer will be less bothered about what the solution is. They will be much happier that you have the solution for it. So find out what their problem is. I mean, look, in basic terms, it's when Jeff goes and sits in the back office, his Wi-Fi is flaky. Fine. Let's find a solution for that. Better access points, more access points, one great big enormous access point that's much better than all the 5 we've got at the moment, whatever it is. But don't just go in and start selling access points, because they'll go, I don't really know what that means. Sell the solution. Don't solve the problem. Don't give them multiple solutions.
Yeah.
I think the other area that MSPs need to sort of focus on is this move away from hardware and a move into these selection of services that need to be tied together. A lot of MSPs have traditionally focused on hardware. You can't get away from hardware. I always take a view that we sell people laptops and used to sell them desktops, because without a laptop or a desktop, we can't sell them the other 90% of stuff that we want to sell them. So it's not that hardware is a loss leader for us. We will make money on that, but it's not a thing that I get excited about selling. It's something that you need to sell just because it's part of the gig. So focus on the fact that that's become even less of a thing anymore. You can buy yourself a laptop, and as long as you don't throw it in the back of the car without a case on it and you look after it, it will be reliable for 3 to 5 years. So the idea that you're looking after the hardware and managing all of that, there's no money in that anymore. You sell them the thing, which is the laptop. You make a small amount of money. Then you talk about supporting the user that's using the laptop. You talk about the Microsoft license that they'll require in order to make that laptop do what they want. You talk about making sure that laptop is used in a secure environment, because you've got endpoint services which are monthly costed. And that's the big thing which most MSPs are forgetting, is small amounts of revenue every month is better than a single CapEx expense. You sell them a laptop for, I don't know, £800, £900, whatever the going rate for a laptop is, you might at best make 50 or 75 quid, I would imagine. Probably nothing by the time you've spent time getting it ready for the customer and putting the user profile on and getting it ready with software and adding the licenses. So let's just say 50 quid at best. And some people might go, oh, brilliant, made 50 quid. Yeah, but you had to spend £800 to make 50 quid. It's not a very good investment, is it? You're going back to your turnover is vanity and profit is sanity. Your £50 profit on an £800 turnover is not very good. But if you can have a £2 or £3 profit on a Microsoft license, or an endpoint protection license, or a voice over IP license for 1,000 clients every month, £2 on an individual basis is not very much, but 2,000 licenses at £2 a month every month, that starts to be really interesting. And I mentioned it only the other day to somebody. This comes out of the telephony business of the early millennium.
Right.
When I used to go to networking events, all those of us of a similar age will remember the telephone guys. The telephone guys always had swish cars and swish suits. And it was because, frankly, they were making money hand over fist. In the days when the telephone services were sold with call bundles, or you were paying per call. These guys were buying in call minutes at a fraction of what they resold to you, and they were making an absolute fortune. And what one of them said to me once, which really stuck in my head, is, we're making money while you sleep. We're making money while you are sleeping, because we're making money 24 hours a day. It was one of the drivers that moved us out of VAR, value-added services, into MSP services, because if you're a value-added reseller, you can only sell your services between the hours of 9 and 5, largely Monday to Friday. There's a finite amount of time in which you can earn money, and it relies on a physical person to go to that place to do the thing that earns the hourly rate or sells the product. If you sell managed services, you charge a fee to look after that site. You are effectively earning money while you sleep. There isn't a limit on the number of hours that you can invest, because it's a rolling, recurring service. And I've absolutely advocated for years that I would much rather have a selection of relatively modest clients paying a fee per month for a variety of services, but for them to stay with us for 10 or more years, than to have big clients that come to us as a one-off hit, don't stay for more than 12 or 18 months, and then leave. You can't build a relationship with people like that, and you don't get the long-term recurring revenue. And if you're a good MSP, you set it up so that the amount of maintenance required to look after those clients that you have for 10 years is as low as is required to be functional, which means the amount of money that you earn is as high a profit as possible. And that's kind of the model that the MSPs should be sticking to. And if they're not, if they're still working on a billable hours basis, I think you're missing a trick.
Agreed. Break fix. I still see lots of value-added resellers out there. Still see lots of break fix companies out there. And as you so clearly put, the limit on the growth of your business is the number of hours in the day. You can't make any more hours. None of us are getting any more than 24 hours in a day. So yeah, managed services, clearly it's well beyond time for people to move forward to that. You've shared so much incredible information. You've shared vendors, resources, all sorts of things here. Excuse the pun, but how does Craig and Team Abussi stay sharp? Where do you go for your information?
A lot of the information that we get about sort of new things or new products or new services come through my technical director, who is absolutely brilliant at sort of working in an environment. I mean, look, he's an online gamer. He's got loads of people that he knows online. He's got lots of people in the technical industry. He's naturally inquisitive. He finds all these sort of things out. I do too, but I tend to find mine. I go to events. I go to webinars. You yourself run various events, which I've gleaned a lot of information from, or been given direction in which to travel and find things out. There are some things where they just organically appear and we investigate them. But I think it's a two-way street. You have to be able to find that information. So the inquisitive nature and the sort of investigative nature of what we do, fine. But you also have to be open to the idea of looking into it further. So I think sometimes with business owners, and I'm not focusing exclusively on MSPs here, but some business owners can have an attitude of, well, the model that we've got's fine. It works. We don't need to move. I'm not interested in that new thing because it's just going to detract me from the thing that we've done forever, which works. So I'm just going to do that. And the problem that you've got is, as we can see in the trajectory of Abussi, ironically, as a database designer, you could argue that that's come full circle. We're kind of back into professional services or whatever. But in general terms, if we'd have stayed where we were, doing what we did with the type of services that we used to offer, then, the old adage of unless you move forward, you're going backwards. Right. And I just think that's sort of the attitude that you have to take. No one is advocating that every week you have to find a new thing and do a new thing. But we tend to have a 2-year period where we have a significant change in the business, kind of almost whether we want to or not, because we realize that move forward will give us a little bit of an advantage. It sometimes will give us a cost benefit. It will sometimes just shake things up and make people feel a little bit more focused on what they're doing, not to unnerve people, not to make them feel wrong-footed, but just to make sure that they've got the opportunity of realizing that things are a progression and a movement forward. And we do that internally with services. Like I say, last year was a massive move into Acronis services. We moved out of our PSA tool. You can imagine that's quite a sizable piece of work, to be honest. The other thing that we do, which I've always done, is summer holidays are the classic and best time to do those kind of heavy liftings, because we all know that if you run an MSP, as soon as the kids go on holiday at the end of July, early August, there's probably 3 to 4 weeks where everything sort of falls off a little bit. It's a little bit quieter. So we've always used the summer holidays as an opportunity for us to get a bit of rest and recuperation, but also for us to focus on these things where impact will be a bit lower. The other time where you can sometimes do that is Christmas, because again, speaking from a UK perspective, where we do love our holidays and we do love our time off, if you get to around the middle of December, 15th, 18th of December, most people have gone a bit sort of demob happy, and it's like, right, we're all ready for Christmas. Nothing happens now until January the 3rd. So you've got a period of time there where impact is minimal, both for yourself if you want to make major changes, but also you can do some heavy lifting on a client site where you might need to shift an internet service, you might need to install new firewalls or networking equipment, or remove servers and move into cloud. You can do that at those downtime periods. So it's about identifying what you want to do, realizing that doing new things is good, excuse me, and finding the time to implement them. Because it's the fight. If you found some really good stuff that you think you need to do, but you haven't got time to do it, well, it's never going to happen, is it? So you need all three of those things, really.
Yeah, interesting to hear you talk about almost the seasonal approach to IT and how you implement things. I want to ask you, I guess from my perspective, you well know that I consider you a great friend. I also consider you a mentor. I've learned a lot. I think our listeners have learned an incredible amount from you. But is there anybody in your life, Craig, that you consider an influence or a mentor? Any people that have helped you along the way or you've learned from?
I think what's interesting is being put on the spot. Again, genuinely, yourself, you and I have got on for so many years. And, let's be honest, it's really interesting and quite rare in these cases for people in similar industries to remain as close a friend as we are over such a long period of time. Your influence has been very strong, and you've given me a great deal of help over the years, physically, as in you've been there when required, mentally, we have good chats, intellectually, introducing me to lots of new concepts and ideas. Those things are really helpful and very stimulating. I mentioned him right at the very beginning, that guy, Bob Fox. There are people along the road that you meet who you realize probably latterly, and less so at the immediate time that you're talking to them, that has been a positive influence and something that's given you a lot of sort of help and knowledge. But I think without singling out any individual, which I am struggling to do other than yourself and Bob that I've mentioned, I think the key thing is it's about going back to that element of community. And it's about saying, well, for me, if I sat and had longer to think about individuals that have helped me, fine, I could probably come up with more names. But I think it's more of a collaborative benefit of knowing lots of people, working with different people, putting yourself in a situation where, uncomfortable would be the wrong word, but I can think of a scenario where people who are running their own MSPs and they meet another MSP and they don't want to talk to them because they go, oh, competitor, must get away from you. Can't tell you anything because you'll steal my business. You've got to put yourself in a potentially uncomfortable situation where you learn things and find out things that are beneficial, but you've got to get into that position, in the first place. There is somebody you and I know where I built a relationship with that person who was a younger person coming into our industry, and we had a really good relationship for a while, and then that broke down, and it was very sad. It was very disappointing, but not unusual. I think it's more typical that you can have fleeting, intense connections with people and maybe learn something from them. And it's more unusual for people like you and I to have a near 20-year connection that lasts the test of time. But neither of those are necessarily better or worse than each of the others, because you'll learn from both. So I think take yourself out of a comfort zone, go to events, go to meetings that maybe you wouldn't normally think of. I mean, look, you know better than most that I said a while back, I don't find myself particularly brilliant at all of this. And although I come across very well in person, I'm a naturally shy sort of person. I don't relish the idea of going to big events. I can do them, but I sort of put the mask on and off I go to the event. But in reality, if you don't put yourself into those situations and you don't go to an event and go, well, today I don't necessarily feel up for it, but if I go today and I learn one more thing that I didn't learn or didn't know before, then that's made this day a better day than if I'd have done nothing. And I think that sort of attitude for an MSP business owner is good. And again, if you've set your business up in such a way that you have a really good team, I'm incredibly lucky to have a really good team that are really competent and professional at what they do, and I have that in spades with the team that work at Abussi, then there will be space for you as the business principal or director, as in Paul, my fellow director, to have days where you go, we're going to go to the NEC and we're going to go to an event for half a day and we're going to meet up with Richard and we're going to have a little bit of a chat and we're going to talk to people on stands and we're going to see what we can find. I think I said to you last year, I went to the same event that we met at a few weeks ago, and we met a company that does hardware repair. Again, not excited about that. It's not one of those areas that we really want to get involved. But, you know, when you've got so many devices out in the field and sometimes they start to go wrong and the warranty's gone and you go, well, customer's not going to want to pay another £800-900 for a new laptop when maybe there's a crack in the screen or whatever. How do we solve that problem? Well, we built up a huge relationship with that company. And since then, a year ago, we've sent lots and lots of devices up to them. They've offered a really professional service. We've got ourselves out of a fix in a number of cases where we've been able to fix laptops that normally we'd probably have had to go, there's nothing we can do, you'll have to throw it away. And it's worked really well. So the day we went to that event a year ago, we fulfilled our brief, which was we found out something that we didn't know at the beginning of the day, and it's turned out to be hugely beneficial. So got to put yourself out there, I think.
Absolutely. I've told you before as a friend that I find your commitment to, like, if commitment is the right word, to life-work balance really inspiring. And you've alluded to it earlier. You touched upon some of the things that you enjoy doing, but tell our audience, like, what does Craig Sharp do to turn off from business and to find purpose outside of work?
I drive 6 miles up the road to Kidderminster, famous for carpets, and also it's one of the country's premium preserved railways. I put on a pair of black trousers, white shirt, a brown tie, and Great Western Railway waistcoat. And I effectively, to use modern parlance, cosplay being a Victorian Edwardian railway signalman, which again sounds like a kind of comedy thing to say, but there are some weird similarities which I'll sort of come on to. I've always had an interest in trains. I was the guy at the end of New Street Station with a notepad back in the 80s, making notes and numbers and doing train spotting and all the rest of it. And I've said this to the people that I work with on the railway. There are days where I go into the railway and I'm operating a signal box. And for those who are in the UK, you should probably have an idea of what that is. It's the big red and black levers that you pull to make the signals and the points work. Outside the UK, maybe you can sort of imagine how that is. But it's big, proper trains that are running to a timetable, and you're the person who has to make sure they go on the right tracks at the right times and maintain safety and all the rest of it. And there are 7 signal boxes on the Severn Valley Railway, and I can operate independently after being tested on 4 of them, and I'm currently operating and learning the 5th one, so I'm working my way down the line. And I've also been given responsibility recently for training the new people who come onto the railway who have never been signalmen or signal women before, and who are learning the process. And that course runs over the winter, and I should be in charge of that with a colleague for the coming winter. But that's what I do, and I absolutely love it. And it's completely different, yet it has tremendous similarities. And I'll give you a brief example. The frame, the thing that all the levers fit in that move backwards and forwards is called the frame. And underneath the frame, each of the levers has a selection of what are called interlocks, which means if I pull lever A, and that would lock a particular route for a train, and I then try to pull lever B, which would allow a train to come and hit that one head on, then it won't let me pull lever B. It's called an interlock, which means if I've done that, it won't let me do that from a safety perspective. And they're all interconnected. It's not just one lever. It's, if you pull one lever, then maybe 3 other levers won't work because that creates the conflicting movement. Well, that's kind of a Victorian computer, isn't it, really? Effectively a series of sort of if and or. So if this is done and that's done, then don't let that be done. And so there is a sort of a computery sort of angle to it, but it is very different. It's very Victorian. It's a bit grimy sometimes, but there's a lovely coal fire that you can put on, and the atmospherics of the whole thing are amazing. And it just means that it gets you out, it gets you engaged with people. You can talk to the people on the platform who are the visitors. They all find it fascinating. And many people like to go into a signal box and have a look around. And straight away, Craig, the teacher, comes out because it's right. Let me tell you about this lever here. And there's some instruments here at the back that are for safety. And we press buttons and there's sort of bells and all sorts of things going on. Let me tell you all about that. So that's what I do as a thing when I'm not doing IT stuff.
I love it. And I said earlier, I find it so inspiring, but I love when you send me the pictures. I'll get a signal message from you, ironically, with a picture from you inside the signal box or whatever. I just love the passion that you've got for things outside of the IT industry, how you get into the flow with that stuff. So never change. And we've got a steam railway up near us here in the northeast, and I've still not been to it. And every time I drive past it, I think of you. But I must go and return the favour and send you some photographs from our local steam railway. See if you find them of interest.
That'd be lovely. I mean, everyone loves a steam train, and we can't get away from that Victorian idea that I challenge anyone who's near a steam train that moves past them to not wave. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, whenever you see a steam train go by, everyone has to wave. Ooh, wave at the people out the window. So I don't know what it is, but everyone
it goes for steam trains and canal boats. So maybe it's a time thing. So you've got to wave at a canal boat when it goes past from wherever you are as well. So yeah. Hey, look, Craig, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I've just noticed the clock. As always, I mentioned earlier, jokingly, we used to allocate an hour aside for the Tech Tribe tribal meetups, and then we would spend 2, sometimes 3 hours talking. We're going down a similar vein here, but I'm very respectful of your time. Let you get back to your day. Before we go, however, I want to give you a public thank you. So one of the charities we support in Tubb is Network 4, which is a Birmingham-based non-profit that helps homeless and vulnerable people. It's a cause that's, as you know, it's very close to my heart. Many years ago, when I moved away from Birmingham, so long-time listeners will know I'm from Craig's neck of the woods, Birmingham in the West Midlands in the UK, the heart of England. And I got married to Claire and I moved up to the northeast, Newcastle upon Tyne. And of course, that meant I had to leave some friends and family behind there. And Network 4, the charity, was, one of the things that I sort of had to leave behind. So I needed someone that I could trust to step in and help Network 4 with their technology. And Abussi has done that for many years. So on behalf of me, Craig, Richard Tubb, but also the team at Network 4, Gary Wickett and everybody there, a public thank you, my friend, for all that you do looking after that charity, because you are a remarkable man. You're a remarkable organisation, and I appreciate all you do for Network 4. Thank you.
No problem at all. It's always good to be able to offer some sort of help to people. And I think it's part of that, moral fibre that we should all develop, which is, if you've done well and you are doing okay, then you should try and help people who are perhaps not, whether you do that through physical means by donating yourself, or whether you do that through helping them do things which might be a bit more complicated, like, managing their mailboxes and managing their sort of IT bits and bobs. So yeah, absolutely no problem at all. And it's such a worthy and great cause that really happy to do that.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. What does the future hold for Craig Sharp and the team at Abussi?
We're going to have a new member of staff hopefully very soon, so that will expand the team. I think I mentioned already the growth of the business into professional services is one that you just can't get away from.
Yeah,
I think in the next 5 to 10 years there will probably be. There'll certainly be a situation where I'm probably less active in the business than I used to be, but that's because in 10 years' time I should be 62. And so that's a very appropriate time for me to go off and do other things. To be honest, I should probably be more permanently based on the railway, I would imagine. And sort of taking a slight detour, that's another thing that's worth bearing in mind. I'm a great advocate of realizing that work doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
Much as it might be the thing that draws your entire focus now, it won't be the thing that draws your entire focus in the future, and nor should it. You should have a period of time when you're not focused on work and you're focused on things that you enjoy and have passion for. And from a signalling point of view, you can't leave work on a Friday and start being a qualified signalman on a Monday. So it takes a transition, and that's what I've decided to do. So I would urge anyone listening to this, if you are approaching that point where life will start to have a change and a transition, find something that you're passionate about and get into it whilst you're still working, so that you can hopefully have a period where you do both and then you can transition into the new thing. I think types of services that we provide over the coming years will just be honed. I do agree with your position that I worry to a degree that managed services will become commoditized. There's a situation with one of our really large clients at the moment, and you can see why this works. They have multiple outposts across Europe and North America, and we currently look after the UK element of that and have done for a number of years. But they're probably looking at it at a HQ level and going, why have we got these guys in the UK and then a different company over there, and so on and so forth. I think what's really interesting is many people who work in our sector are so much more aware of what goes on in a business than often the managers themselves.
Right.
We look after 3 different sites in the UK for this particular customer, and there's awareness that we have about sites, about people, about the way things are set up, the way things work, that many of the people that work there just don't have, because they've had staff turnover, and we've been there longer than many of the long-term staff now. And they're looking at it in sort of, why don't we just get a big global IT company to look after all of this? And I worry that will happen in a lot of our sector. And what will happen is this, mark my words, the people at HQ will love it because there will be a singular cost that they pay every month, and they can sit back and go, well, all of our IT is looked after by this global IT company, and it's really good on the balance sheet, and financially it makes perfect sense for us. And what will happen is everybody at the ground level will go, why are we so poorly serviced? Why is it taking 17 days for someone to answer an email? Why does nobody listen to us anymore? I've got this broken thing that's been broken for 3 months and no one's sorted it out, and so on and so forth. So you will gain at the high level and businesses will make more profit. You will lose at the lower level because that attention to detail and that personal service is what's lost. And I get that personal service costs. And I get that if you want that level of attention from someone like Abussi, where we're making regular visits and we have that awareness and we're very proactive, you're going to have to pay maybe a premium. I don't know. I don't think we charge that much more than anybody else. But I think it's a real tragedy that IT becomes commoditized, because I think you lose so much. And if things don't work properly and things are broken and things are not working in a way that they should, and you then start to lose that multiplying effect of IT because people are not getting the value out of the investment they've made in IT, then you kind of beg the question, what's the point? And the idea that everything's just going to be a tab on a Chrome browser and everything else will just work from there, I think is for the birds. I really do. IT security has to be managed. People have to be managed. You know, there's a joke, isn't there? We have that phrase in IT that this problem was a picnic problem in chair, not in computer. Now that's slightly derisory, and I don't mean it to be, but the truth is a lot of what we do on a daily basis is not loosely technical support as people might think it is. It's, how this is my go-to. It's Brenda in accounts going, why isn't Sage working? Why have I lost this? Some of it might be Brenda, some of it might be Steve, some of it might be Jim. It doesn't really matter who it is, but it's the person that needs that support. And no amount of millennials and people who are brought up in an IT world are going to solve that problem. There will always be, in a commercial environment, things that need to be done that can't be done at a massive, high global level and need a person-on-person connection to resolve the problem through understanding what the problem is to start with. And if all you do is condense issues into a kind of AI style chatbot, which is your problem that your printer doesn't work? Well, it sort of is, but it isn't. That doesn't compute with me. I will have to pass you on to a call center where you'll wait 4 hours to get a response. That's not going to make people feel happy about using their IT. It's just going to annoy them. So I think the longer we can keep personal connection and contact with IT related matters, the better for all of us, the end user and the IT service provider.
Powerful advice to finish this episode with. Craig, this has been an absolute honor. Thanks for being my personal pick, a special guest for episode 150 of Tubb Talk. It's a milestone for me and the show, and I've been waiting so long to get you on to share what I knew, but perhaps the rest of the world knows now, which is you're an incredible human being. You're an incredible MSP business owner, just full of so much wonderful knowledge that you've shared with our audience today. So thank you. I appreciate all our years of friendship, all you've done for me and for the wider managed service community. Before we let you go, though, we've got to say, you're going to have made new fans, you're going to have made new friends today. If anybody listening to this show wants to contact you, continue the conversation, how can they reach you?
They can reach me on my email address, which is craig@abussi.co.uk. That's ABUSSI. And that's really the best way to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to people, more than happy to field any questions, more than happy to talk about some of the vendors that I've spoken to. I've even over the years given remote demos of Untangle and Arista products if people are interested. More than happy to help, and just email me and happy to engage with you.
And I think as we end the podcast there, we're going to show there are very few guests who are brave enough to give their email address out on Tubb Talk, Craig. So you've already made it into the top 1% there. Thank you, my friend. I so appreciate this time together with you.
No problem. Thank you, Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're very kind. You're very thoughtful. And I look forward to seeing you in person on May the 9th when we meet up in the Toon for lunch, hopefully.
I will look forward to that, and I'll post some pictures to social media so you can see what Craig and I look like in person, in real life as well.
Me towering above the Tubbster.
We've got to do one of those comedy photographs where I kneel down a little bit so I make it look as though you're about 7'8". Well, we'll do that one. So.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. But it's been real pleasure. I hadn't realised the significance of today, and I'm honoured that you chose me to be on such a significant podcast. And look, let's just give the love back, because to have 150 podcasts shows a dedication to the community that I think is unparalleled. So thank you, Richard, for your time and your investment of yourself into the community. I don't think there are many people in our world, both in the UK and wider, who have not heard of Richard Tubb. And I think it's because you cast a very long shadow across our industry and offer a great deal of investment of yourself to make it a better community. So thank you too.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that so much. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this journey. And trust me, 150 is not the end. There's many more to come. I'll look forward to seeing you on Tubb Talk 151. Cheers. Hey folks, Richard here. Thanks for listening today. I know you've got a ton of options for who you listen to nowadays, so I really appreciate your support. Do you have any feedback on this episode? Ideas for future guests? Tweet me at Tubblog using the hashtag TubbTalk. I respond to every tweet and really appreciate your feedback. Hey team, this is Richard again. Just one more thing before you take off, and that is MSP Insights. Now, every Tuesday, I share my thoughts on the business of IT with you, the managed service community. Thousands of managed service providers already subscribe to MSP Insights. It's easy to sign up, easy to cancel. MSP Insights is basically a short email from me every Tuesday without fail with advice on growing your IT business, plus cool resources I've found, discovered, or started exploring that week. It's kind of like my diary of cool things and often includes articles or books I've read, tools I've discovered, and events I think you'd be interested in, often sent to me by my friends and Tubb Talk podcast guests. So, if that sounds fun, a short, tiny bite of MSP goodness every Tuesday, and you'd like to try it out, just go to go.tubb.co/Tuesday. That's go.tubb.co/Tuesday. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.